In the heart of the city, where dreams often merge with reality, stood an old apartment building known as the Harrowing Heights. A relic from a bygone era, the building had seen better days. Cracked walls, dimly lit corridors, and a haunting silence that seemed to linger, even in the brightest of hours. Sarah, a recent college graduate, had moved into one of its cheaper units, enticed by its affordability and central location. She was eager to start her new job, meet new people, and embrace the adventures of adulthood. But little did she know, adventure was waiting for her. Just not the kind she had envisioned. Sarah had settled into her new apartment quite smoothly. Days were filled with work, nights with Netflix marathons. The place seemed perfect, almost too perfect. One evening, while browsing through a magazine, she felt a sudden chill in the air. She brushed it off as her imagination and continued reading. But then she heard Itae's soft whisper, barely audible, as if someone was speaking just behind her ear. "Who's there?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. There was no response. She stood up, looked around, checked the locks, and reassured herself that she was alone. But the feeling of being watched never left her. It clung to her like a shadow. The whispers became more frequent. Sometimes they were unintelligible murmurs. Other times they sounded like a faint laugh. Sarah started to notice other strange occurrences. Objects would be moved from their usual places, lights would flicker, and there was an odd smell, like old, damp wood mixed with something more sinister. Determined to find a logical explanation, Sarah called in an electrician and a plumber, but they found nothing unusual. Her friends suggested she might be overworking herself, or that the stress of a new job and city was getting to her. But Sarah knew it was something more. She could feel it in her bones. One night, as she was lying in bed, the whispers started again. This time, they were clearer. She could make out words, and they were calling her name. Sarah, Sarah. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to listen. The voice was soft, almost childlike. "Help me," it said. Gathering all her courage, Sarah replied, "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence. And then, "I am here with you." Sarah's blood ran cold. She felt a weight on the edge of her bed, as if someone had just sat down. But there was no one there. Trembling, she reached out, her hand met with nothing but thin air. She could hear the whispers all around her now, growing louder, more insistent. Desperate for answers, Sarah decided to do some research on the building. She visited the local library and dug through old records and newspapers. What she found shocked her to the core. Decades ago, a young girl named Emily had disappeared from the very apartment Sarah was now living in. Her body was never found, and the case remained unsolved. The neighbors at the time reported strange occurrences, much like what Sarah was experiencing, but the police dismissed them as mere coincidences. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah reached out to a paranormal investigator named Marcus. Marcus was well known in the city for his expertise in dealing with the supernatural. Skeptics called him a fraud, but those who had experienced his work swore by his abilities. Marcus arrived at Sarah's apartment with an array of equipment: TMF detectors, infrared cameras, and other devices Sarah couldn't name. He set up his gear and began to communicate with the unseen presence. The whispers grew louder, the air became colder, and then, for the first time, Sarah saw it. A faint, translucent figure of a girl, standing in the corner of the room. The girl's eyes were filled with sorrow as she looked at Sarah. "Help me," she whispered again. Marcus asked the spirit what it wanted, and the answers came in bits and pieces. Emily had been trapped, unable to move on because her body was hidden, buried within the walls of the apartment. She needed someone to find her remains and give her a proper burial so her spirit could finally be at peace. Sarah and Marcus began to tear down the walls of the apartment, guided by Emily's whispers. It wasn't long before they found a small, hidden compartment behind the bedroom wall. Inside were the skeletal remains of a young girl, along with a locket bearing the name Emily. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she carefully gathered Emily's remains. They held a small, somber ceremony and buried her in the local cemetery. As they said their final goodbyes, the air around them seemed to lighten, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt truly at peace. The strange occurrences in her apartment ceased, and Sarah knew that Emily had finally found her rest. She continued living in harrowing heights, but now with a newfound appreciation for the unseen and the mysteries that linger just beyond the veil of our understanding. And every night, before she went to bed, she would say a little prayer for Emily, grateful for the unexpected bond they had formed.